I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people and the traditional owners of the land on which I stand today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging. I was raised through a late 80s, early 90s primary education system that made no mention of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander culture. The adventures of Captain Cook were idolised, Jorgensen et al., so were those of Burke and Wills. The gold rush was investigated as one of those important eras of history. Colonisation was more significant than that of the traditional owners of the land and their own rich histories and beliefs. This leaves me with a huge gap in my own education, leaving me low in confidence in incorporating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learnings into the classroom. It means that consideration of any topic about or for Indigenous students is understood in full, and collaboration with local elders needs to be prioritised. I have grown up in and now work in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. There are approximately 560,000 children enrolled in primary schools in Victoria. Of these children, only 10,400 are identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent between the ages of 5 and 14. This small percentage of Indigenous Australian students shows how little exposure I have had to Indigenous culture. The primary school I work at as a teacher's aide has no students of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background. This impacts how the idea of Indigenous Australians is an enigma rather than a reality, and undermines the importance of country. I was fortunate enough to receive 2 2-hour training sessions of CUST, Cultural Understanding and Safety Training, in June of this year at my work in a Melbourne outer suburban primary school. The training was run by Victorian Department of Education Koori Engagement Support Officer Seth Nolan. Seth shared the history of Indigenous people in Australia and Victoria, and also their current needs of today, particularly in relation to education. He also shared his own personal story and of the country he was raised in central Victoria. Seth, along with his brother, provides additional community outreach through music, using upbeat tribalistic electronica music inspired by dreaming, stories and the laws of their culture. In addition to Seth, a local Indigenous elder, Auntie Irene, shared her knowledge of the CUST training. Auntie Irene is an experienced weaver. However, she is also available to teachers to provide feedback and suggestions on planned lessons that encompass any form of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander content. It is this support that educators need when teaching or incorporating content that they feel less confident in. And the support will help to build teacher confidence and therefore more use of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander content through the curriculum. Auntie Irene's weaving was taught to her by her paternal grandmother, and to complement her artistry, she is also a published poet. Weaving for Auntie Irene is a skill that she shares to connect people to each other, their history and their country. She has been teaching traditional weaving to community members and in schools for the past 7 years. Both Auntie Irene and Seth Nolan are members of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait community who give their time to share their heritage and experiences with today's education workers in order to shape relevant learning in a modern and correct manner. The Education Department has given their wisdom a voice in our classroom activities. In regards to teaching, one of the first items to teach students is that our country's history does not begin in 1788. Harrison recommends that when teaching timelines, they do not start at 1788. 1788 is just one point in a very long history of our country. Secondly, I need to be very aware of not taking a deficit discourse when integrating Indigenous knowledge. McCallum and Wallace state that Indigenous education is often seen as a problem for society and policy. Batt et al. Notes that a both ways pedagogical approach should be taken, whereby the construction of new understandings and knowledge is created by integrating non-Indigenous knowledge with Indigenous knowledge and coming together with something completely different. A clear example of this would be to use the local Indigenous seasonal descriptions alongside the mainstream seasons. And note how much more aligned Indigenous seasons are with our actual weather patterns in Australia. Thank you for your time.